people listening and watching know what a just verdict is. And I'm hoping and praying for that. And I'll see you in March, Chris. So thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, David. Remember, no matter what happens in March, we win.
Yes, you win. Some more about yesterday's verdict and more. As I'm coming to you live from our nation's capital in Ottawa, this is David Krayden. I've got a lot to talk about today. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back in mere moments.
The Prime Minister lied, and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist.
Yes, please like the station now. It helps us get over that bump, which is YouTube suppression. And boy, oh boy, do we have suppression here. Mention it every day because I have to remind you to do it. I hate to ask, and subscribe. We're getting closer to the 50,000 mark. I think we're going to finally break through. Thanks for your support. Share this broadcast with your friends and family right now, because we've got 3 weeks left before Mark Carney could potentially be elected, not just appointed, not just installed as Canada's Prime Minister. We need as many people as possible to see this broadcast and others, because the time is short. You know, if you ever saw the movie Gettysburg, there's a famous scene in there. One of the generals says, "There is no time." And that's exactly where we are. We've got to focus on ensuring Mark Carney does not take over this country for the globalists. That's important. And if you catch that interview at the very beginning, I'm going to show a bit more of that later, but that's an interview I did with Chris Barber in February. And of course, I just had a haircut and I need one desperately because my hair is falling in my face. I mean, it's horrible. But as for an ex-military guy, it's horrible. But we'll rectify that, I think, Tuesday. I did chat briefly with Chris yesterday. I'm not going to say what he said, but I just wanted to give him my personal support because he got 2 guilty charges yesterday. And let's have a look at this. That's very important. I put this up yesterday, but both of them were charged and convicted on mischief. The counsel to commit mischief was stayed. Counsel to commit intimidation, not guilty. Intimidation, not guilty. Obstruction of police, not guilty. Counsel to obstruct police, not guilty. Chris Barber was found guilty of disobeying a court order. And encourage you, I keep updating this story in the Post-Millennial, which I put up yesterday, within seconds of the verdict. Well, within probably about 60 seconds, I got it up, right? Maybe a minute. And that's primarily why I was there. I was also there, of course, to cover it for myself, for my Substack, which I'll be doing a piece on today. This broadcast and last night's broadcast, which a lot of people didn't watch because it's not I didn't put it in a great time slot, but I wanted to get it out as soon as I got home. We were literally sitting in that courtroom for over 6 hours. We got a break for lunch, about 45 minutes. But of course, everybody rushed back because it was standing room only in that courtroom. And of course, you can't stand in the court, right? So if you can't find a seat, you're out. And the judge was very strict about that yesterday. But I just want to say a few more things about yesterday's verdict and what it means. What does it mean? And I'm surprised all of these courageous YouTubers who are going on every day about Pierre Poilievre's rallies and how successful they are. And yeah, I'm glad Pierre is having successful rallies. Not a peep about this verdict yesterday and what it means. Not a word. Why? Because there wasn't enough clips to scalp? I don't know. But it's I was proud to be there. Ezra Levant was there yesterday. There was a CBC reporter there yesterday who had been there from day one and has done a very good job at covering the trial. I'll give him that. He really has. There's some good reporters at CBC. That's why I say CBC can survive without your public funding. And I've been saying that for years. It can do just fine. But I was hoping to have Eva Chipiuk, my good friend from Edmonton, and one of the Freedom Convoy lawyers. She did a bang-up job at the Emergencies Act inquiry, cornering Justin Trudeau. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And she'll be on next Tuesday. I've got Eva on next Tuesday. But she made this comment yesterday on X. And Justice McVeigh, it's actually Perkins McVeigh, is saying that no one challenged the constitutionality of the counseling offense. She reads a part of the statement Tamara made with the Honorable Brian Peckford, where she said, "We will remain here peacefully, but with resolve." And this was inciting others to act. Makes me question why the police charged the Honorable. Why didn't the police charge the Honorable Brian Peckford for the statements? Looks likely this whole episode, and Eva doesn't want to talk too much about the verdict, but we're going to talk about what this means in a larger sense, in the aggregate. What does this verdict mean for free speech, free assembly, protest, your rights as a Canadian? And what else did Judge Perkins McVeigh say yesterday? Together with others, they led a convoy of semi-trucks and other vehicles and demonstrators from Western Canada, arriving in Ottawa on January 28, 2022. Well, she got the date right, and I was there on January 28, 2022. In fact, I was actually in Kingston, and when they passed through Kingston, I got to Ottawa just in time to get downtown for their arrival. But what's this about Western Canada? Yeah, there were a lot of rigs from Western Canada. There were also a lot of rigs from Ontario, from New Brunswick, from Nova Scotia, from Quebec. I met with these people. How come this is all some Western Canada virus? And that really teed me off yesterday when she said that, as if this was some sort of Western alienation stunt. Yeah, Chris Barber is from Saskatchewan. Yes, Tamara Lich is from Alberta. Yes, that means they're from Western Canada. But the Freedom Convoy was made up of a truly national base from coast to coast. Not the other coast. I don't think there were too many people who made it down from the Arctic Circle. But in terms of the Atlantic and the Pacific, yes, they were together. And I really found this to be interesting as well. Interesting, I'm going to say that. Another statement from Judge Perkins McVeigh yesterday. Although the term Freedom Convoy has become synonymous with all protests of government COVID restrictions and mandates in 2022, it was a series of different protests across various parts of the country, organized initially to oppose COVID-19 vaccine mandates for cross-border truck drivers. The movement seemingly quickly expanded to include all COVID-19 restrictions and mandates. It was, in fact, Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, along with others who came to Ottawa, that formed the Freedom Convoy Corporation. Tamara Lich was the president of that corporation. And my apologies for the misspelling of this. We pulled this down from Otter this morning, and I had hours, literally hours of not testimony, but the judge's verdict to go through. So I apologize for the misspelling of Tamara Lich's last name there. I should have noted that. But yes, and this is why I say, and once again, why was there such a big deal? Judge did not like Chris Barber's attitude in his TikToks, or that he was a selfie celebrity. This seems to really have bothered her. She kept saying he conducted himself like a celebrity or a rock star. I've never met a more humble man, actually, than Chris Barber. I've met a man who's not obsessed with himself, who's not navel gazing, who's not consumed with his own ego. So he did nothing to try to make himself into a celebrity or a rock star. And yeah, he put some selfies on social media, but so did Justin Boy, Sock Boy. Yeah, he was famous for the selfies, wasn't he? But that's okay. It's Justin Trudeau. And of course, Banker Man. Yeah, he can put the selfies up too. That's okay. There's a different standard for people like that, right? Think back to COVID, people. We were all there together. I got the vaccine twice. I have buyer remorse over that now. I did it because I figured I had to, because my mother was in a nursing home and I wanted to visit her because my job insisted upon it. I couldn't get into Parliament Hill without the vaccine certificate. So I got it. And I didn't realize that there were issues surrounding it. Yes, we know it's safe and effective. I didn't know there were some questions around it. But remember what COVID was like? There was no food in the stores. You couldn't go to the gym. You could go to a strip club or the liquor store, but that's okay because the masses had to be distracted somehow, didn't they? It was difficult to do healthy things, very easy to do unhealthy things during COVID. And that's the way the government liked it. And they didn't want you to go back to work. Just take your stipend. Take your monthly stipend from the government and just shut up. Because we're using this crisis, we're exploiting this crisis, and they did it very well. But I would argue, and I would argue this very seriously. Tamara Leach and Chris Barber put themselves out. We won't say they put their lives on the line. They came close to it at times. They don't know what the reaction could have been. They could have been accidentally hurt, accidentally injured in the aftermath of the Emergencies Act invocation. But they had guts and courage to go out, and they put their jobs on the line, especially Chris Barber. Chris Barber put his jobs on the line for other truckers who wanted to say no to the vax. Chris Barber put his reputation, his life, his family, everything on the line because he believed very strongly that this is something that should have been fought. And you know what? Their actions probably did, I'm sure they did, save lives in this country from people who could make the choice about what to put in their bodies. I'm being vague about this because you know what happens if I'm not. So they gave people the freedom to say, I choose to take this injection or I choose not to. And if I choose not to, it shouldn't affect my job, my livelihood, whether I can go to the store or a restaurant or the gym or anywhere else. It's my choice. And I'm not hurting anybody by making that choice. And I would have loved to have heard a judge say that. I would have loved to have heard a Canadian judge stand up and say, these two are heroes, Canadian heroes, because they stood up for freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and they saved lives. They saved people's lives in this country by their actions. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I want to play this clip. I played it last night. I'm going to play it again. I'll tell you why. Because if you had sat there for the 5 or 6 hours of the judge's dissertation, you would have heard her repeat a TikTok post from Chris Barber 3 times, at least, where Chris Barber uses the F word repeatedly. And the judge keeps repeating this as if Chris Barber is incapable of putting a sentence together. This man is not only capable of putting a sentence together, he is a deep thinker. He thinks a lot about what Canadian society is all about how the COVID vaccine affected that, how lockdowns affected that, how the Trudeau government affected Canadian society, and where we should be going, and what freedom really means. Chris Barber can articulate that as well as anybody I have ever met in my profession, in my business, in my more than 30 years as a journalist and communications person. And I'm going to play this again because Chris got nothing out of this. No book, no deals. He's been struggling financially to get to these court appearances for a year and 7 months. And I don't know what's laying ahead for him. But whatever it is, I'm going to be there for him. If I have to raise money for Chris Barber, I'll do that. I'm prepared to do that because I not only like this guy, I admire his guts and his courage and the fact he got nothing out of this.
And I would love to apologize to the judge for my use of language throughout my social media in my past. I remember back in my social media following was truckers, and that was basically my following. So language was usually something that I didn't care too much about and threw it around freely. And listening to my words in the courtroom there, I regret a lot of that. And I've done everything in my power to change that now. Anything I do for social media posts going forward. One of the biggest things that I noticed through Freedom Convoy was that there was a lot of young kids watching my social media posts, and they didn't need to hear that. So I always say that I probably grew the most throughout Freedom Convoy. I'm not an organizer. I'm not a protester. I'm not an activist. I'm just a blue-collar truck driver. I run a famous red truck now, and every time I have that truck on the road, it's got the big Canada label down the hood on it, and I've people yelling at me on the radio. It's hard to make a mile because you've always got somebody that wants to stop and have a conversation, but I'm more than willing to do that. I've met so many amazing people across the country in the last 3 years, and very appreciative for all the support we have. Tamara and I, like I said, the world's longest mischief trial in Canada, but we're still standing and we'll continue to stand. And come March 12th, regardless of the decision, I might lose the privilege to cross that border, because of a criminal charge on my record, or I might wind up with 10 years in federal prison, like what they're asking for right now. But we saved a lot of lives through Convoy, and we made a lot of the good friends and woke a lot of people up. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. I hear these stories every day. I get messages from different people across the country just saying what a dark place people were in Canada throughout the convoy or throughout the mandates. And we gave them light, and that was one of the biggest things that always brings me back to the point that we did the right thing. We're still standing. We continue to stand, and we'll stand no matter what happens in March.
Yeah, fantastic. What a moment. Well, I encourage you to go back and watch that entire interview from February. I think it was 16th or 17th, just after the 3-year anniversary of Trudeau invoking the Emergencies Act, which of course was the death knell to the Freedom Convoy. This was the big black boot of government oppression. And it worked. But you know what? The Freedom Convoy also worked because it was the beginning of the end of the COVID mandates. It was the beginning of the end of lockdowns. It was the beginning of a new freedom in Canada. And we can't lose that freedom. Now, a lot of people said, whoa, we don't want to do this again after Parliament prorogued. I saw people on social media say, hey, that would be bad for Chris and Tamara. We don't want to do that. It would be irresponsible. No, we sat back and watched the prorogation go on. Mark Carney go through this idiotic, imbecilic liberal leadership walk where he won 87% in every riding in Canada, including that of Chrystia Freeland. We watched the Mark Carney be installed and the Parliament not sitting. And we did nothing. These people did something. So what's the effect of this? Well, it's clear we have a two-tier system of government. You want to go out and you want to block traffic or tractors or construction workers in making a pipeline. Oh, that's okay because you're with Greenpeace or you're an environmental person. Oh, that's all right. You can do that and nobody's going to arrest you. And if they do, you'll be released immediately. There won't be any charges. And for God, it's never going to go to trial for a year and a half. No, that's not going to happen. Not in Canada. You're allowed to protest, except if you're Tamara Leach and Chris Barber. Or what if you're really angry about what's happening in Gaza? Well, I think what's happening in Gaza is terrible too. But there's a lot of people out there who are so unhappy about it that they're occupying buildings or they're occupying Union Station, and that's unacceptable. That truly is an occupation. But they're getting off scot-free. They're getting off without any arrests being made or charges being laid. Certainly never going to trial. So if you're saying something the Liberal government or Doug Ford's government is in agreement with, protest all you want. Protest until you're black in the face because the government won't try to stop you. Try to address freedom in this country, free speech issues, lockdowns. It's going to get you. And let's remember who's behind this. And all of those leeches calling themselves conservatives who work for Doug Ford. You listen to this too. Doug Ford is not a conservative. He's a phony conservative. He's a progressive, not a conservative. And Doug Ford is the one charging these people. They're in the Ontario Provincial Court. Doug Ford is the one charging these people. Doug Ford could have put an end to this. Doug Ford is the one who's continuing to allow the Crown to appeal. So let's remember, it wasn't just Justin Trudeau. It's not just Mark Carney. It's Doug Ford as well. And what about Mark Carney? Do you think Mark Carney has had some effect on all of this? The Liberals and the woke people in academia and the judiciary are taking heart. It looks like the Liberals are going to keep hanging on to power. So it's okay. We can keep putting our foot on the Freedom Convoy. So is Mark Carney's imminent, and I say hopefully not imminent, election have something to do with continued oppression? Yes, it does. You bet it does. Now let's have a look at this. And I want to address this because I talked to a lot of folks in the courtroom yesterday. A lot of people who watch this show, who read my columns, and it was all very complimentary. Like I say, it wasn't there yesterday. You got a pat on the back by anybody. I say what I need to say in this broadcast. I get suppressed because of it. I don't make the numbers some other YouTubers are getting, but I'm not here for that reason. I'm here to tell the truth and not to be in the pocket of any political party. Now, I think there's only one alternative right now to Mark Carney. There's only one party that has a hope of forming a government instead of the Liberals, and that's the Conservative Party of Canada. That doesn't mean I'm going to say everything the Conservative Party of Canada says and does I agree with. I don't agree with their recent purge of a couple of candidates, one from Southwest Ontario, the other from Montreal. I think that was very stupid. But I think Pierre Poilievre needs encouragement in any way, but he also needs to get away from his communications people who are telling him, play it safe, Pierre, move to the left. You can get some of those Liberal voters if you move to the left. Conservatives do this every time. And the neophytes who are telling you, oh, he's got great attendance at his rallies. They don't understand the political process, and they don't understand the history of the Conservative Party. Every election cycle, the Conservatives start off with a right-of-center agenda, and they gradually move to the left because the communications people tell them, hey, you can get those Liberal voters if you just move to the center, move to the left. And of course, the Liberal voters aren't fooled. They're going to say, why do I want to vote for an imitation Liberal, a Liberal light? I can vote for the real thing. So yes, I'm glad Pierre is getting great attendance at the rallies, and that's positive. But here's a recent, this is in the Hub this morning. And this is confirming, and the Hub is a basically small C conservative publication. They've been very critical of polling. They've been very critical of subsidies to the media. Look at this. This has the Liberals at 43%, Conservatives at 38%. If I'm reading that right. The NDP down to 8%. Now, if somebody tells you that the Canadian federal election is just like that in the United States, the presidential election, where Donald Trump looked like he was behind, but look at the attendance he had in the rallies and look at the final results. The difference is the polling in that election generally showed Kamala Harris 1 or 2 percentage points ahead or tied with Donald Trump, including in all those swing states. Now, we knew that was skewed. We knew that was wrong. We knew it was the opposite. Trump was ahead in every one of those swing states. But the margin of error wasn't that large. And the other difference is the United States has a two-party system. And that was confirmed when Bobby Kennedy moved over as an independent candidate to support Donald Trump. It became a two-party race at that point again. Canada is a four-party system. As much as I despise and detest the Bloc Québécois, and even though they're minuscule in terms of their overall percentage because they're focused only in Quebec, they are the spoiler in Quebec, and they do it every time. And we also have the NDP, of course. Now, the Green Party and the PPC are both running about 1 or 2%. So that's not a huge factor right now in terms of the potential electoral results. But what's happening is that the NDP support is evaporating. The Bloc support is evaporating, and it's going to the Liberals. This is why we have a crisis on our hands. This is why it's not like the U.S. presidential election. It's not just like Donald Trump. And anyone who tells you that doesn't understand Canadian politics at all. Speaking of Mark Carney, BlackRock's report, I encourage people to read this if you can afford to subscribe. This is interesting. Once again, we find that Mark Carney is working for China. Mark Carney lobbied Beijing to deepen, weeks before seeking the Liberal Party leadership, lobbied Beijing to deepen cooperation. Now, he's been deepening cooperation with China for years. We've already noted how Mark Carney wants to replace the U.S. dollar with the Chinese yuan as the global U.S. currency, global currency. So what is going on with Mark Carney?
Trade anchored on the United States that Canada has relied on since the end of the Second World War, a system that, while not perfect, has helped to deliver prosperity for our country for decades, is over. Our old relationship of steadily deepening integration with the United States is over. The 80-year period when the United States embraced the mantle of global economic leadership, when it forged alliances rooted in trust and mutual respect, and championed the free and open exchange of goods and services, is over.
Okay. This was said after the phone call with Donald Trump last week, where Donald Trump called him Mark and the Prime Minister of Canada, not the governor of the 51st state. So what is going on with Mark Carney? What is he doing here? Does he even know? From one day, it's the relationship is over. The next day, it's Donald and my good friend, the President of the United States. So Mark Carney's playing a very dangerous game here. And I think it's all as a result of the internal polling they're doing to say that, okay, you got to move. Today, you've got to move over here in a more retaliatory mode. because the polls are indicating Canadians want the United States punished, even though we got off very easily, very lightly from the latest assault from Donald Trump with tariffs. So Mark Carney wants it both ways. He's saying, on the one hand, I did it. It's because of my relationship with Donald Trump, we didn't get hit with more tariffs. And he's also saying, but that's not good enough. We're going to fight back. Still running against Donald Trump, not Pierre Poilievre. He's still running with this Canada Strong nonsense, even though for Mark Carney, it's never been about Canada Strong. It's about China Strong. So let's listen to what Pierre Poilievre's plan is, which I think makes a heck of a lot more sense than anything Mark Carney has said from the beginning of the election campaign.
Extra revenue generated from expanded trade with the United States will go right into our armed forces. We will hit our 2%. I will propose to the President to accelerate renegotiations of CUSMA, bringing in a new deal on trade and security. CUSMA must be renegotiated anyway, next year. Why wait? Why not get it done now? Why not end the uncertainty that is paralyzing both sides of the border and that is also costing us jobs today? We should set a firm date to finalize a new deal. And I will propose that both countries pause tariffs while we hammer out that deal. Keeping destructive tariffs in place kills jobs on both sides of the border and so serves no purpose at all. It does not make sense to go on killing jobs, disrupting markets, and weakening both our economies with on-again, off-again tariffs for months on end as Canadian businesses and workers live in paralyzed terror. In the meantime, during negotiations, suspension of tariffs would have to go both ways. Either they take them off or we would not. We would require this to be fully reciprocal as we work towards getting a deal. As I said, Canadians have the right to know what red lines I will draw in order to protect our country in these inevitable negotiations that any future Prime Minister will have to have and have quickly. So let me be clear. First, I will protect our control over our border, our security, our resources, our farmers, including our supply-managed farmers, our fresh water, our automotive workers. Also, we will protect our sovereignty, our laws, our currency, our dollar, our land, our waters, our sky, our culture, our official languages, and our resources and Indigenous rights will not be under the control of any other country. This is non-negotiable. We will protect Canada's sovereignty in any negotiations. Second, for years, the Americans have demanded we do more in defense. But the truth is, Canadians have been demanding exactly the same thing. And so I will commit that any extra revenue generated from expanded trade with the United States will go right into our armed forces. We will hit our 2%. We will take back control of our Arctic waters from the Chinese and the Russians. We will rebuild our military and will become a truly sovereign nation with a strong armed forces that can protect us. For years, the Americans have demanded we do more in defense. But the truth is, Canadians have been demanding exactly the same thing. And so I will commit that any extra revenue generated from expanded trade with the United States will go right into our armed forces. We will hit our 2%. We will take back control of our Arctic waters from the Chinese and the Russians. We will rebuild our military and will become a truly sovereign nation with a strong armed forces that can protect us.
Okay, sounds a bit optimistic. We're not going to be taking back the Arctic without the United States involved. However, this is reasonable. And this is where Pierre needs to be focused, not in a shouting match with Donald Trump, not with crazy threats about we're going to take you to the mat, not with crazy ideas about winning a trade war. Mark Carney, one day it's retaliatory tariffs. The next day we're going to be working with Donald Trump. I don't think Mark Carney has a clue in hell what he wants to do. But at least Pierre Poilievre is enunciating, articulating a clear policy here. And this is what he needs to do. In addition to change. People asked me yesterday, well, what do you think Pierre Poilievre should do? Stop attacking Donald Trump. Talk about change. Talk about, were you better off 10 years ago than you are today? Worked for Ronald Reagan in 1980 when he went up against Jimmy Carter, and that was only 4 years. Are you doing better off now than you were 10 years ago? Of course you're not. And most Canadians would say, no, I'm not. Is Mark Carney any different from Justin Trudeau? No, he's not. In fact, he's worse. He's in China's pocket. He's a globalist. He's got so much baggage. His firm was in Bermuda, was funneling its taxes through Bermuda, and on and on and on. He won't tell you where his financial assets are. He's got 120 days to do that, and he's going to wait until the election's over to do that. But Mark Carney is toxic for Canada, and you make the decision. I'm not going to tell anybody how to vote, but it's quite clear. The chief aim right now has to be to keep Mark Carney out of office, to ensure Mark Carney does not win election as Prime Minister, as leader of the Liberal Party, to ensure the Liberals do not win either a majority or a minority government in the next election. And it's clear there's only one other party that can stop them at this point. We have 3 weeks, folks. 3 weeks to save this country. Let's work together and ensure Mark Carney is not an elected Prime Minister. Let's work together to ensure we have a truly small c conservative future. And there's only one way to do that right now. And I think we just saw the leader who needs to replace Mark Carney as Prime Minister. That's a fact of life at the moment. That's a fact of life, and we have to accept that, and we have to embrace it, and we have to move quickly in the next 3 weeks, because we're in a very bad spot. I'll be back in a minute with some concluding remarks.
The other person that's running, most probably is, the Chinese community knows, Zhou Te, Zhang Jing.
Yeah, sorry, I accidentally clicked on the Paul Chiang comment. That was the actual, that was from the actual speech where he made that incredible comment about having his, telling people to abduct his political opponent. Anyway, I'm back again tomorrow, same time, same place. Thanks for watching today. It's been a consequential week. Let's stand up for freedom in this country. It's under attack, and the verdict yesterday does not bode well for free speech. I've had people already tell me they don't want to talk about it. It's just, I don't want to get into trouble. Well, we need to talk about it. We need to have free speech, freedom of assembly, and the freedom to protest in this country. That's what Canada used to be all about. And it can be again. Let's continue to resolve to resist. And I'll be back again tomorrow, live from your nation's capital. Yeah, it still is. Thanks for watching. God bless you and Godspeed. I'm David Krayden.